Hello, Hassler here. I'm going to work through some of the problems here on 8.6, and then your job will be to go back and finish the remaining problems. So let's take a look at problem 1. It says use the graph to complete each part. A says write an equation for f of x. And so remember that when you go to write an equation for f of x, we're going to be doing this in y equals mx plus b form, okay? And that means I need a slope and I need a y-intercept. Okay, so looking at the graph, I have a slope. I'm going to pick 2 points. And it looks like I have a slope of 1. So I'm going to write f of x. I want to label this function. A slope of 1, so you can write x or 1x. And it looks like I have a y-intercept of 2. That's where I'm crossing the y-axis. All right. And then it says write an equation for g of x. So again, I feel like at this point you guys are pros at doing this. Hopefully you can take a minute and try to write this equation yourself. Right, I'm going to pick 2 points. Again, I have a slope of 1 and I have a y-intercept of -1. So g of x is equal to 1x minus 1. It says state the x-intercept for f of x. I'm going to go back to my f of x graph, and an x-intercept is where I cross the x-axis, just like a y-intercept is where I cross the y-axis, okay? So I'm looking for the x-intercept of the f function, and that would be this right here. I am crossing the x-axis at -2, and I like to write these as ordered pairs. Remember, in an ordered pair, the x comes first, so -2, and then the y value is 0. Okay, so remember that for y-intercepts, the x is always 0. For x-intercepts, the y is always 0. Okay. For b, it says state the x-intercept for g of x, and I'm circling that. My g function is crossing the x-axis at 1. So again, I like to write these as ordered pairs. This would be the point 1, 0. And again, I notice that that y-coordinate is 0. C says h of x equals f of x times g of x. So there's that multiplication. And it says multiply by hand and find the function for h of x. Okay, so I'm going to write h of x equals, and it's equal to f of x times g of x. I have the f of x function, so I'm going to write x plus 2 times, so right next to each other, these two groups are going to be right next to each other in parentheses, the g function, which is x minus 1. And it says to multiply by hand. So remember in class we've been talking about really using this distributive property, right? I'm going to take this first term of x and I'm going to distribute that to each term in the second group. X times x is x squared. And then I multiply x times -1, which is a -1x. And then I go back and distribute the 2 in that first group to each term in the second group. And so 2 times x is 2x, and 2 times -1 is a minus 2. And then I can combine like terms. I like to remind myself this is the h of x function. So I have x squared, -x plus 2x is a positive 1x, and then minus 2. Okay, so D says use your calculator to check your h of x function, and that means that we are going to graph, okay? And so I'm going to go to my calculator, and you should grab your calculator as well. And I am going to go to my y equals. And remember when we check in y1, we type in what the product was. So the product was x plus 2 in parentheses times x minus 1 in parentheses. And then I arrow down and I type in what I got when I actually multiplied them out, that x squared function. So x squared plus x minus 2. And then I hit graph to make sure that the two graphs are exactly the same, and they are. You could see my blue graph, this U-shaped graph, and then right over top of that is the red graph, which means that I did my multiplication correctly. So I'm just going to put a check mark. If you end up seeing two different U-shaped graphs, that means that you did not multiply correctly, okay? What you have written here in product form should match your work, your final form, if you did everything correctly, okay? E says sketch the h of x function on the grid above using the table features in your calculator. I'm going to erase what's on my graph so it's easier to see, okay? And yeah, I'll go ahead and do that in blue. So it says using the table feature. So that means that I'm going to go second graph. And notice I have this X column, and then I have the Y1 column. That's related to the product that we typed out. And the Y2 column, that's related to that final answer after doing the multiplication. And notice that the two Y columns are exactly the same. Another way to verify that my work in part C was done correctly. So it says to graph using the grid and the table features in the calculator. And so I'm going to plot the points that I see. And I can use this first point that I see, 0, -2. Okay, so I'm going to plot that point 0, -2 on my grid. And then when I arrow down, I have the point 1, 0. So I'm going to graph that. Oh, look, that is the x-intercept of that G line. I can plot 2, 4, 2, 4. But then 3, 10 is off my grid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to arrow up to get a couple other points that I could use, okay? Because this only gives me a partial picture, right? This should be a U shape. So I'm going to graph -1, -2. Okay. And I'm going to graph -2, 0. Oh, look at that. That lines up with the x-intercept of my F graph. Interesting. I get -3, 4. I see some repeating x values here. And then I'm going to connect those. And I'm just going to go ahead and label this as h of x. Okay. Okay. So we did that for E. And just a reminder, we did, we had our equation in Y1, and then we used second table. And we used the points x, comma, y in order to plot those. Okay. Okay. So now let's take a look at what the remaining question says. It says, how many x-intercepts does h of x have? Okay, well, h of x is this U-shaped graph, and it looks like it crosses the x-axis twice. It has 2 of them. And again, it looks like it shares the x-intercepts of these 2 lines. So that seems interesting. So I'm just rewriting the same x-intercepts we wrote for the lines of f of x and g of x, -2, 0, and 1, 0. And then it says, what do you notice about the x-intercepts for your lines and the x-intercepts for h of x? They are the same. Okay. And so that's what we noticed when I went to graph that, right? The x-intercepts are the same for the lines and h of x. See if I can squeeze that on there. Okay. Okay, so your job is going to be to work through problem 2 using the information that we worked through in problem 1. And then that sun at the bottom is saying, hey, what conclusions can you draw, okay, about the graph of h of x when I multiply f of x and g of x together? Make sure that you practice using that graphing calculator in order to access your table and graph your U-shaped graph. Okay, I'm going to go ahead then and move on and work through problem 3 on the back side. Problem 3 says, use the information to complete the table. Write an equation for f of x. Okay, so remember, when we ask you to write an equation, we're in that y equals mx plus b form, and slope is that change in y over change in x. And we've talked in class about looking for patterns in your table. When I look at this table for f of x, it looks like I'm subtracting 1 each time. So my change in y would be a -1. And when I look at the x values and how those are changing, it looks like they're adding 1 each time. So the change in x would be a positive 1. And the other thing I like to look for in my table is whether or not I can identify the y-intercept, that b, and the y-intercept is clear when the x value is 0. And I do have that in my table, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and write this equation. I'm going to use f of x to label it. F of x equals negative 1x plus 2. B says fill in the g of x column, given that g of x is equal to x minus 3. So I have a couple of options. I could either substitute x values in to the g equation to fill out my table, or I can use my graphing calculator. Okay, so again, I could evaluate g of 0, since that's my first x value. And that means I would replace x with 0. So 0 minus 3, which is negative 3. And I could continue doing this. I could evaluate g of 1, g of 2, g of 3. I also noticed that I have a slope of 1, which means that that my outputs are changing by 1 as my x values are changing by 1. So I could just add 1 to each of these. That would be the pattern relating to the slope. Or I could use my graphing calculator, go to y equals. I could clear out what is there. Okay, I could type in my function for g, x minus 3. And I could go to my table, second graph. And again, I could start at that x value of 0, and I could just kind of cheat and use this graphing calculator to help me fill out this table. Okay, so you have lots of options. C says graph and label the lines for f of x and g of x on the grid. Okay, so f of x has a y-intercept of 2 and a slope of negative 1. So down 1 to the right 1, down 1 to the right 1. And you really want to extend your graph. I could go up 1 to the left 1. You really want to extend your graph so you're going through both axes, since we are asking about the x-intercepts. And again, you want to label. I like to do in different colors to also help separate what's happening. The g function has a y-intercept of negative 3 and a slope of 1. So up 1 to the right 1. And again, I'm just going to extend so that I go through both the x and the y axis. Okay, and then I need to label this one, g of x. State the x-intercept for each function. Okay, so the x-intercept, again, is where you are crossing the x-axis. The f function is crossing the x-axis at 2, so 2, 0. And the x-intercept for g of x, the g function is crossing the x-axis at 3, so 3, 0. It says use your calculator to graph j of x and complete the j of x column in the table, all right? And so j of x, it says f of x times g of x, right? So we're going to do that same thing that we did on the front side, where you would type in that product to start. So that f function, negative x plus 2, okay, times that g function, which was given, that's x minus 3. And then you guys can, once you multiply by hand, I'm going to let you guys do that. Once you multiply by hand in part D, you can type that result into Y2 to verify your answer, and you can use the table feature to help you graph. And then you're going to state the x-intercepts for j of x. And I'm going to let you guys do that because that's what we did on the front side, okay? And then I just want to go ahead and get you set up for problem, I want to get you set up for problem 4. Just to get you started. So it says find m of x given that m of x is equal to p of x times r of x. Well, in order to find m of x, what that means is that I need to actually multiply out p of x times r of x. Okay, so I would actually need to write out what the p of x equation is. And I would actually need to write out what the r of x equation is. So that once I have those two equations, the slope and the y-intercept, I can fill those two equations out and then multiply by hand like we did in problem 1 and you practiced in problem 2 and problem 3, okay? My comment for number 5, for 5 it says what is the product? And just a quick reminder, product means multiply. So when it says, what is the product of the two linear functions, x minus 5 and x plus 2? Again, I'm going to multiply those together, just like I'm multiplying in problem 4 and I did in problem 1 and you did in problems 2 and 3. Okay. And so your job then is to continue working on both sides of this page and turn that into classroom.